Good morning. The Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled A Review of the Office of Space Commerce's Mission Authorization Proposal. And I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for the opening statement. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Without objection, it's ordered. We can't be number one on Earth if we're number two in space. Under Jared Isaacman and President Trump's bold leadership, NASA is proving America belongs on top. This year we made great strides as evidenced by the successful Artemis II mission, which flew humans around the moon for the first time since 1972. We also have a thriving commercial space sector and a dynamic ecosystem powering every corner of the space economy. In Florida alone, we've almost doubled the number of private sector jobs since 2011 when we launched the shuttle. Also in the last 5 years, we watched a number of launches in 2021 grow from 45 to 192 last year, and of course, we're having a great year here in 2026. I trust we are all committed to ensuring America's space leadership will be innovative and lead with true direction as America moves forward with public safety and upholds our international obligations. Today, we will review the Commerce Department's proposal for a mission authorization framework. Mission authorization is how the United States government reviews and oversees commercial space activities. This proposal will help the United States meet its obligations under Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, which requires governments around the world to authorize and supervise non-governmental activities in space. Currently, the United States has a clear regulatory framework for activities like launch and reentry, the use of spectrum, and remote sensing of the Earth. But as our commercial sector pushes the boundaries of what is possible in space, and we must provide the regulatory certainty that companies need. Failing to do so would slow investment, thus slowing innovation and undermining America's leadership. In the past, some have proposed a complex approach which created duplicate authorities across agencies and would have increased red tape of our commercial space sector. That's why President Trump issued several executive orders to ensure the United States dominates across all aspects of space. One executive order directed the Department of Commerce to develop an approach for authorizing novel space activities. Several aspects of this proposal align with legislation considered by this committee last Congress. This Commercial Space Act of 2023, sponsored by our good chairman, Dr. Babin, offered a common-sense path forward. Today, we will review the Office of Space Commerce proposal in full with our witness, Mr. Taylor Jordan, the Director of Office of Space Commerce. I want to thank Mr. Jordan for joining us this morning. And I look forward to a productive discussion about how Congress can boost President Trump and NASA's mission to ensure the United States remains the world leader in commercial space. I now want to recognize our ranking member, Ms. Fushi from North Carolina. Ms. Fushi, welcome, and you are recognized.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Herodopoulos, for holding today's hearing to review the Trump administration's mission authorization proposal. I want to welcome Director Jordan and thank you for being here to testify before the subcommittee. Mission authorization and a regulatory framework for novel space activities may seem far removed from the concerns of most Americans today. Families are focused on whether they can afford health care, groceries, gas, housing, and education costs, and whether good-paying jobs and economic opportunities will be available in their communities. Those concerns must remain at the center of our work, and I am fighting to ensure that every American has affordable access to everyday essentials and the resources they need to build a secure and prosperous future. Space policy is connected to that work. Space-based technology and services support communications, navigation, weather forecasting, environmental monitoring, national security, and other systems that Americans rely on every day. In fact, if you use GPS or check the weather on your phone today, you relied on technology in space. Space is, quite literally, in our pockets. But space also inspires us to look beyond the everyday and creates opportunities to build the workforce and capabilities that move our country forward. Just look at the successful Artemis II mission and the benefits it has already delivered. The growing commercial space economy can also create jobs and expand economic opportunity. But those benefits must reach communities across the country, not just a select few. Like other emerging technologies, a mission authorization framework must strike the right balance between expanding economic opportunity and ensuring meaningful oversight, accountability, and appropriate guardrails. This is a governing challenge with which I'm deeply familiar through my work on artificial intelligence. As I have made crystal clear, technological progress cannot come at the expense of other important U.S. interests, including national security, scientific advancement, foreign policy, safety, privacy, and the environment. That is why we must consider the implications, impacts, and potential unintended consequences of any mission authorization proposal and process. Large satellite constellations, for example, can interfere with optical and radio astronomy due to their reflectivity and radio transmission interference. Further, future commercial spacecraft that might land on the surface of Mars could bring contamination that could affect the search for life, a fundamental scientific pursuit. We must also carefully consider how new space technologies and mission proposals could affect orbital debris risk or threaten the sustainability of space environment. Let me be clear, supporting technological progress and requiring responsible behaviors from commercial companies are not competing goals. We can do both, and any mission authorization framework must reflect that principle. I look forward to hearing about the Office of Space Commerce's mission authorization proposal, and looking ahead, I also hope the subcommittee will seek input from other federal agencies, industry experts, scientists, and additional stakeholders. Before I close, Mr. Chairman, I want to note my disappointment that the committee was not provided with advance notice of the Office of Space Commerce's release of their mission authorization proposal, a briefing on the proposal, or even a briefing on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA's, fiscal year 2027 request for the Office of Space Commerce, despite multiple requests. This is not a transparency we expect as the Committee of Jurisdiction. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Fushi. I now want to recognize our chairman of the full committee, Dr. Babin. Dr. Babin, you're recognized, sir.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Aeronautics, for holding this very important hearing, and thank you, Director Taylor Jordan, for being here today. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Since the days of Apollo, America's leadership in space has been powered by innovative commercial sector that we have, the envy of the world. While NASA and other government agencies remain indispensable partners, they increasingly serve as customers rather than operators. As private space activity continues to expand, America's commercial space industry has become more essential than ever before in maintaining our nation's global leadership. But we should not, however, take that leadership for granted. As other nations, particularly China, under the Chinese Communist Party, seek to overtake us in space, we must ensure that American innovators are competing against our adversaries, not against unnecessary government bureaucracy. Today, we will examine a topic that has been long of interest to me and the government, and that is government authorization and supervision of private space activities. And while the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, and the Department of Commerce each have statutory authority to regulate specific types of space activities, a growing number of non-governmental space activities do not clearly fall within these existing frameworks. And although the United States has long upheld its obligations under the Outer Space Treaty to authorize and supervise activities of its nationals in outer space, the commercial space industry has told us for years that the lack of a clear regulatory pathway has discouraged investment and slowed the development of novel space activities. In 2017, Representative Lamar Smith, who was then chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, a good friend of mine, introduced the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act to address this issue. The bill sought to establish a clear, light-touch framework for the Department of Commerce to affirm that non-governmental space activities not addressed by existing regulatory frameworks were consistent with the United States' obligations under the Outer Space Treaty with respect to private actors. The bill passed the House in 2018, but did not make it to the President's desk before the end of the 115th Congress. Just last Congress, I introduced the Commercial Space Act of 2023, which similarly gave the Department of Commerce authority to issue certifications for space object operations through a streamlined, minimally burdensome process. Many of us have long argued that, given its experience licensing private remote sensing activities and its statutory direction to, quote, foster the conditions for the economic growth and technological advancement of the United States space commerce industry, the Office of Space Commerce is the appropriate agency to exercise that authority. And while Congress has continued to consider the appropriate path forward, President Trump took action last August by signing Executive Order 14335, which directed the Department of Commerce to propose its own approach to mission authorization. Commerce published the latest version of its Space Commerce Certification proposal in March, outlining a voluntary process for authorizing novel commercial space activities that it calls Space Commerce Certification. The proposal offers several benefits. First, it seeks to articulate specific light touch requirements for space activities. The Office of Space Commerce would then conduct due diligence on each application while coordinating the interagency review process. The certification would not infringe on the existing authorities of other agencies. Instead, it is intended to provide a means for other regulators to satisfy portions of their own review processes, further streamlining the path to approval. The office also anticipates rapidly iterating on the certification framework as it processes applications, particularly for different categories of novel space activities. Today's hearing will allow us to learn more about this proposal and how it compares to past legislative efforts, including the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act and the Commercial Space Act of 2023. It will also allow us to consider whether this proposed approach fully meets the needs of the commercial space sector, or whether legislative action is needed to codify the Department of Commerce's authority over these activities. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we will consider whether this proposed process, while thorough, avoids establishing unnecessary or burdensome requirements for operators and imposing barriers to industry innovation. I know that Director Jordan and his staff have put an extraordinary amount of work and thought into developing this proposed approach. So I look very much forward to hearing what you have to say today, and appreciate the time, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Lofgren from California. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and as well, Mr. Jordan, for being a witness today. I think a lot of people in America don't realize that the United States has an international obligation under the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 to authorize and supervise non-governmental activities in space conducted by U.S. individuals or entities. Now, currently, the U.S. policy framework for authorizing and supervising space activities pertains only to commercial launch and reentry, commercial space-based remote sensing, and radio frequency communications. But we know much more is on the horizon. In fact, much more is going on already. It seems like almost every day we hear or read about a new planned commercial space technology or service. Just last week, FCC approved a license for a space activity that will, by design, reflect sunlight back and alter the physical conditions on Earth. In a rare admission, the FCC said that addressing any concerns related to the satellite's purpose was outside of their jurisdiction. That admission illustrates in part why we're here today. No federal agency has statutory authority to oversee novel space missions. How we in Congress consider which agency should have such statutory authority to ensure novel space activities align with our international treaty obligations. It's not just an interesting policy question. There are real risks, including potential financial liability for U.S. taxpayers. And as the chairman has mentioned, companies and investors also need predictability in the regulatory landscape as they weigh business decisions. Now, as the chairman has mentioned, we've worked in multiple Congresses, have seen many proposals over the years from the executive branch and the legislative branch, but we have not yet landed on a solution, and we need to do that. I believe we ought to advance a commercial space industry that contributes to the public good and a strong economy. Clarity about who regulates specific activities is needed. I also believe that any solution must allow for some common sense rules for in-space operations to address international obligations, national security, foreign policy, public health and safety, and national interests like maintaining a safe and accessible space environment and not undermining our own scientific capabilities on the ground and in space. In that regard, Mr. Chairman, I would urge that we also consider the expertise and equities of other relevant agencies, such as the Department of Defense, FAA, and NASA. I also want to highlight one of the Office of Space Commerce's other activities that is of great importance, standing up a civil space situational awareness capability to monitor satellites and space debris and notify operators of potential collisions. This effort, called TRACS, has reached a pilot phase, yet inexplicably, the administration's fiscal year 2027 budget request does not propose funding to continue the TRACS project. Don't we have to worry about the potential collision in space, especially as orbits become increasingly congested? Despite the importance of TRACS in a global space economy in the hundreds of billions of dollars, OMB requested just $11 million for the Office of Space Commerce for fiscal year 2027, an 80% cut from the fiscal year 2026 appropriation. Should we conclude from this budget request that the administration does not prioritize ensuring that the United States remains the world leader in commercial space? It's not clear to me how the Office of Space Commerce would be able to take on the added responsibilities we're about to hear about today at the proposed funding level. We have a lot to discuss. This hearing is an important one. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lofgren. Let me now introduce our witness. Our witness today is the Honorable Taylor Jordan, who I'd like to welcome back to the committee. Mr. Jordan formerly worked as a staffer on our environmental subcommittee. Mr. Jordan serves as the director of the Office of Space Commerce. I'd like to thank Mr. Jordan for joining us today, and we are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Herodopoulos, Ranking Member Foushee, Chairman Babin, and Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I also want to thank the staff of the Office of Space Commerce for their tireless work on mission authorization, which has created a tremendous work product that I'm excited to talk about today. The Department of Commerce and the Office of Space Commerce support one of America's greatest strategic advantages, the unparalleled strength of our commercial space sector, a sector defined by decades of flight heritage and technology advancement, a sector that also requires a regulatory structure and environment that can match its rapid pace of innovation. Today, I am here to discuss our mission authorization proposal that meets industry where they are, We call it the Space Commerce Certification. This proposal delivers a streamlined approach for emerging space markets and technologies that our entrepreneurs need to move fast, attract investment, and cement U.S. space leadership for the next century. Our commercial space sector has moved beyond only providing services to government agencies and now directly supports our modern economy and way of life. Today, American companies are building entirely new economic domains, from in-orbit manufacturing of pharmaceuticals to energy infrastructure and even a lunar economy. It is now more important than ever for the government to get its regulatory house in order and unleash our American space capabilities. Industry is no longer focused simply on communications or remote sensing, but is joined by innovators conducting missions to the moon, developing private space stations, and building orbital data centers. We refer to these efforts as novel, and the current licensing regime is not designed to address them. Today, the FAA regulates launch and reentry, the FCC regulates radio frequency transmission, and the Department of Commerce regulates remote sensing. Everything else is shoehorned into legacy processes never designed to handle them. U.S. regulations simply do not offer a clear path to yes for novel activities. Instead, they risk trapping our industry in an endless maze. In Executive Order 14335, President Trump directed the office to propose a solution. In close consultation with industry stakeholders and interagency partners, OSC developed a certification process that could provide more clarity for industry, protect core U.S. government interests, and improve intergovernmental coordination. The cornerstone of our proposal is the creation of a certification that is intended to unify existing regulatory pathways into a clear, straightforward, centralized process. Rather than forcing companies to navigate multiple agencies independently, OSC would serve as a regulatory clearinghouse. Our certification would gather information from applicants and incorporate them into a single voluntary application, and then circulate this application to the federal interagency for review. Following this review, OSC could provide a space commerce certification to the applicants. The FAA and the FCC could then waive relevant sections of their own regulations or bypass their own separate interagency review. As a result, commercial operators with novel space missions would have a clear path to government authorizations through a single entity utilizing a single process that's tailored to their needs. OSC intends to build this process dynamically through an extended pilot phase and by leveraging emerging industry standards. OSC's role would be to validate and clear industry-led norms in coordination with interagency experts. A key pillar of our process is the presumption of approval. For novel space activities, regulatory ambiguity prevents the free flow of capital. This process would give investors the predictability they need that supports the growth of the industry. It would require the government to justify a no rather than forcing industry to beg for a yes. Over the years, industry has asked for greater transparency in our federal space regulations. The lack of a process for novel space activities is bad for business, bad for innovation, and ultimately bad for the American taxpayer. Our certification process would hold the government to a higher standard, to be clear about the questions we ask, the reasons we ask them, and the decisions we make. OSC's proposal has been informed and shaped through deliberate transparency. The office continues to engage with industry and stakeholders on the best approach to streamline this authorization process. We also continue to work with the White House and our interagency colleagues to coordinate the executive order's direction. America's space entrepreneurs deserve a framework that moves at the speed and scale of their ambition. The Office of Space Commerce stands ready to work with this committee, the U.S. interagency, and our industry partners to deliver that solution. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan, very much, and I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions for Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan, as you know, my district is home to the world's most active space launch facilities. Launches and reentries go through a rigorous FAA licensing process under the Department of Transportation. As the Office of Space Commerce develops this new certification framework, I would like to know more about how this will fit alongside regulatory authorities, not duplicate them. And so, in my question, the Office of Space Commerce has said that the Space Commerce certification would not replace the CR, SRA, FAA or FCC statutory responsibilities, and companies would still need to obtain the requested approvals from these agencies. So my question, will there be missions that require both an existing federal license and an OSC certification? If so, how do we prevent duplicate reviews and unnecessary delays, and what should the coordination look like?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. So to answer your question, the short answer up front is yes, there are missions which will likely require existing licenses through those existing statutory obligations, whether it's launch reentry or radio frequency transmission. So what we're doing with the Office of Space Commerce's mission authorization proposal is focused on in-space activities for novel activities, things that do not really exist today. In our process, we have developed questions that we will ask the applicants, and also on behalf of the interagency. So as a company seeks a license for the novel space activities, we can then deregulate and reduce the burden on industry to provide questions that could supplement existing statutory obligations for the FCC and the FAA. That's a secondary nature of the deregulation, but the first one is really to fill those gaps that exist today in regulations for things that don't quite exist.
Well, thank you. The proposal also suggests that other agencies could rely on an OSC certification to satisfy some of their own regulatory requirements. What factors should determine when another agency can rely on that certification instead of conducting its own separate review?
Thank you for the question. So that will come down to the interagency as we move forward with this process. We have submitted our proposal to the White House, and we anticipate and hope for our ability to move forward with that. So through that process, the interagency, we sat down with them and we had many conversations about how this would look with the existing regulations as they exist today through CRISRA, through the FAA, and through the FCC. So there could be questions that we could ask on behalf of our interagency colleagues that could satisfy portions of their own regulations, and that could be something like a payload review question on behalf of the FAA or an orbital debris mitigation question on behalf of the FCC. Allowing OSC to become the clearing house for novel activities could then streamline the process and provide the certainty that industry has been asking for.
I think one question I like to ask, since it's broad, is you're dealing with these different commercial companies every day, and where the innovations have been pretty dramatic. What kind of keeps you up at night? What are you most concerned about as the industry speaks with you back and forth? And what suggestions would you have for us as we make this proposal?
So that's a great question, and it's quite difficult to answer. But I would say what the ranking member mentioned in her opening statement about new novel use cases that are coming out, and we see different approvals from U.S. regulators, but they were clear in their own press about it that they are only regulating what they have existing authority to do, like radio frequency transmission. And we talk about the space mirror question that Ranking Member Lofgren answered. They do not answer the question about in-space activities, and that is what needs to be authorized and supervised by the federal government to ensure that we have those core U.S. government interests satisfied, and that's space safety, international obligations, national security.
Well, I appreciate your testimony today and building on the good ideas that our chairman proposed back in 2023, and I look forward to a good conversation today. And I'd like to now recognize our ranking member from North Carolina, Ms. Fushi, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Jordan, the department's fiscal year 2027 budget proposes just $11 million for the Office of Space Commerce and does not identify continued funding for the Traffic Coordination System for Space, or TRACS as it's known, the government's civil space traffic coordination system, which now supports 62 pilot users and more than 11,000 satellites. If the department is not supporting continued federal funding for TRACS, how does the Office of Space Commerce propose to provide operators and regulators with independent and reliable collision warnings or orbital debris data before and after a mission is certified?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Fushi. So in the FY27 President's budget request for the Office of Space Commerce, we do continue the work of our track system. We containerize the code, and we are building internally the trade space of how that program will move forward in the future, whether that's relying on user fees or collaboration with industry to look at the process moving forward. That is also an executive order deliverable and is mentioned in the executive order for the ability for the track system to utilize partnerships with industry for user fees. So I just want to be clear that the question is not should we provide SSA data, it's how do we do that as a federal government.
Since the certification process in the office's mission authorization proposal is voluntary, if a certified mission causes damage, who is legally and financially liable? The operator, the department, or the American taxpayer? And what enforcement authority does the office have when something goes wrong?
Thank you for the question, and that's a great one. So the liability and indemnification question has been a long issue in the space sector. Currently, because it's a voluntary process, we would rely on the statutory obligations of other agencies to help carry that out, and I believe the FAA through DOT has some statutory obligations for liability. But this is a question that has been percolating for many years. We absolutely want to address that in an iterative process with industry. We want to have to be cognizant of impacts to industry for those things that you just said and move forward collectively with the interagency, with industry, and with Congress as well.
Thank you for that response. While the department is proposing to cut the Office of Space Commerce's budget for fiscal year 2027 by 80% from 2026 enacted levels, the department is also proposing to add responsibilities with this space commerce certification proposal. That sounds like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Does the $11 million proposed in FY 2027 include funding to carry out this certification proposal?
Thank you for the question. So in our FY27 proposal, that has come before we actually have approval to move out on our proposal. So we have created the proposal, we have submitted it in response to the executive order deliverable, and now we are waiting for the next steps. So we have not built into our budget if we need additional staff for that. But I will say we do envision this being a light touch administratively. We will rely on our interagency partners who have expertise in many of these new technologies and missions, and we are also looking at the options for bringing in details to provide that expertise in-house to create our certification questions and application.
Will Congress be seeing an updated budget proposal that reflects the actual personnel and financial resources you would need to carry it out? And what are the funding and personnel needs for implementation of your strategy?
Thank you for the question, and I'm happy to take that back and work with you on that. At this point, we are working with our FY26 funds, look forward to congressional action on FY27, and happy to work with you to discuss the different activities that the Office of Space Commerce is carrying out.
Thank you for that, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Fishy. Next, we'll recognize our chairman, Dr. Babin, for 5 minutes. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for being here. I appreciate this. You described the proposed space commerce certification as voluntary. If commercial space operators do not participate in the certification process, will other agencies prohibit their missions or operations?
Thank you for the question. So in developing this proposal, we worked hand in glove with the interagency to get their feedback to be able to say yes to how this works. And our submission to the White House is, to me, that means that we have the interagency in a good place to use our framework that we have proposed. And it is voluntary right now. We are leveraging existing authorities that we have from the office and others to create this as an opt-in program. But the one thing I would say is there doesn't exist anything right now. We kind of hobble together in an ad hoc fashion different obligations and statutes to create a system. But this would provide the clarity to industry. And if we can provide the additional confidence and streamlined effort that industry is looking for, we are confident that they will use this voluntary system.
Are you confident, and how will you ensure that this voluntary process does not turn into just a vast expansion of regulatory authority?
That's a great question, and it's obviously top of mind. So we want to be able to play in the swing space between regulatory authorities as they exist today because it's voluntary. Obviously, with congressional action, you all have the capability to make that not voluntary. But in the process, again, we have to utilize the interagency, their expertise, and make sure that it is a voluntary program that people can opt out if they want to. They do not have to use this program, but we need to show the value in it for industry to want to use it and to show success.
Absolutely. Currently, the Commercial Remote Sensing Regulatory Affairs Office issues licenses for private remote sensing activities. The Department of Commerce is also the only agency with clear statutory authority to review end-of-life operations. How will the Office of Space Commerce leverage your experience with licensing private remote sensing operations to inform the space commerce certification process?
That's a great question. So the Office of Space Commerce is uniquely positioned because they have such a strong vantage point with industry, and that's actually in our mandate, and that's to be the industry advocate on behalf of the U.S. government. We also have our CRISRA experience that you mentioned, where we are a space regulator as well. So that provides us a number of different opportunities to go into how regulations actually work and have that experience under our belt. In addition to that, as discussed before, we're also creating an operational system through our space situational awareness capability. So really, we hit three things that give us quite a unique vantage point over other agencies to provide this type of novel activity.
Well, to follow that up, the remote sensing licensing process was plagued by never-ending interagency reviews and uncertain conditions that resulted in companies and technologies and expertise going overseas to more favorable jurisdictions. What lessons have the Office of Space Commerce and have you learned through that process, and now how have those lessons informed the development of the space commerce certification process?
So our work through CRISRA has informed how we established kind of our certification process. So obviously through things like dispute resolution, we have different mechanisms to elevate disputes of national security or international obligations or commercial interests from multiple levels to make sure we get to conclusion on a fast timeline. In our certification, we've also built in some timelines into that are, again, informed from our experience with CRISRA. And then we also have some very short timelines for re-review if needed. So we're trying to give that confidence to industry.
Okay, and I've got time for one more. The FCC recently scheduled a meeting to consider a new order that requires applicants to respond to certifications regarding various space safety information, including trackability, satellite size, collision risk, casualty risk, and post-mission disposal. When the FCC proposed similar requirements in the past, this committee sent letters outlining FCC's lack of authority over space activities beyond those related to spectrum and communications. Under the first Trump administration, the Office of Space Commerce also submitted comments to the FCC docket urging reconsideration. I asked unanimous consent to enter these letters into the record. Ultimately, the FCC withdrew those proposals under significant criticism from Congress and other agencies and the public.
Without objection.
Amen. How would the Department of Commerce's proposal address the regulatory gaps that other agencies have attempted to fill, and would it reduce the need for other agencies to test the limits of their statutory authority?
So that's a great question.
And I think from there we'll yield back, and we'll get to that question a bit later. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
bet.
Next, I'd like to recognize Ms. Gillen from New York for her 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. And thank you, Director Jordan, for testifying here before us today. So I want to build a little bit on Chairman Babin's questions to you. I share his concerns about this just being another regulatory burden for companies to have to overcome. And you mentioned that the process is voluntary. What is the real incentive for companies to get this certification?
Thank you for the question, and that's a great one. That is at the core of why we did this. So there are gaps in regulations right now. Why we did this is because an industry, a company who has a novel mission can put a license into the federal government, either through us, FAA, FCC, and it's no guarantee that they'll get an answer. So what we're trying to do is to actually first get an answer, and that's step one for us. Step one is closing the regulatory gaps. Now, the second part of that is the voluntary nature. We want to provide incentive for companies to use this new system. And the incentive that we've come up with is if we can provide a streamlining of the different regulations where a company would put in one application to us, it could help satisfy portions of the FAA and the FCC's obligations for their own work. We do not see us as duplicating their efforts and do not want their statutory obligations, but we will work with them to help make the process way more streamlined so companies can get to yes.
So is there a role that we can play to make the process even more streamlined and more efficient?
Absolutely. So what we would love to do, assuming in the future that we have the approval to move forward with implementing this structure, we anticipate being able to work on some easy use cases first directly with companies, either through a tabletop exercise or directly with some novel missions that are closer and mature to becoming reality, and iterate with Congress, with the interagency, and with industry on what that looks like. And obviously, at the end of the road here, making it non-voluntary has its merits as well, and that takes congressional action. But we would love to get a few use cases under our belts to make sure the system we've created has no unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you. And as you're vetting the companies that are putting in for the certification, what kind of guardrails have you put in there to protect national security?
Absolutely. So through the interagency, we will have the Department of War and NASA, FAA, FCC, State Department, all with the core U.S. government equities, and that's in addition to national security. There are international obligations, space safety. We need their expertise to be able to have those conversations, ask the right questions with us. When there is a dispute over something through the interagency, we feel like we have built in a dispute resolution elevation process that we've modeled after our CRISRA license as well, our CRISRA work. So we feel like we will have the ability to seek resolution, but national security is extremely important, and the Department of War will absolutely be in the interagency process.
Okay, thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Gillen. Next, we want to recognize the representative from Florida, Mr. Webster, for his 5 minutes to question. Mr. Webster, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Jordan, how critical is it for the OSC to establish a voluntary opt-in framework to address potential liability in commercial space activities?
Thank you for the question. So the issue of liability is a difficult one. I believe at this point, no U.S. regulator requires the indemnification for the U.S. government for activities, but this is something that we absolutely will take into account as we build this system. We understand that liability will increase as the space sector increases its cadence of missions and operations, but this is something that we definitely want to take a look at and work with you on.
Okay, thank you. To what extent will the OSC ensure that its mission authorization proposal protects U.S. financial interest as it relates to potential liability issues?
So thank you for the question. So important to us is listening to industry and understanding their pain points. And if liability issues become a pain point that they cannot live with, that is something that we're going to have to take into account as we build this system. Again, it's voluntary to start and looking forward to building that out. But This process has been built on transparency and in conversation with industry, and we will continue that.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a copy of my November letter to the CRS memo on the topic of space object liability.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Okay, and also, Mr. Jordan, the OSC mission authorization proposal does not seem to address space nuclear systems. Meanwhile, the FAA recently approved the first commercial nuclear payload demonstrating its expertise. Does the OSC need or see a need to include space nuclear technologies under a mission authorization? And if it does, how does it work to avoid duplicative kind of interaction between you and the FAA?
So that's a great question, and it highlights the uniqueness of novel activities, if you'll allow that one. So for nuclear technologies, the FAA has the obligation for public safety, especially as it comes to launch and reentry. So I believe they've recently looked at this issue and are handling the public safety aspects, especially for the payload review, to make sure that what is being launched into orbit is safe, pertaining to nuclear. Once it gets to space in the future, if there's a novel activity for something that in space happens, through our process, OSC would be the regulatory clearinghouse to ensure that safety remains intact throughout the life of that mission. So FAA is going to handle it for launch and reentry, and once it gets to space, we will then provide our expertise through the certification and the authorization process. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there are potential questions that we could ask in our application on behalf of the FAA for them to do their job even faster and even easier. And that's one of the impacts that we envision having on industry, giving them that confidence that it's one application, we can help satisfy other things through other obligations.
Can you confirm that the OSC can directly adopt FAA findings and issue mission authorization for nuclear applicants without redoing their work?
So that's a great question that is going to rely on the interagency's willingness to see our certification process through. At the moment, once we have submitted this proposal to the White House, we have reached consensus with the interagency, and they have said that, you know, in the future, this could help supplement or offset some of their work and obligations. But, you know, the proof is in the pudding, and as we get some of these use cases under our belt, it's going to rely on continued interagency collaboration.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Professor. Next, we're going to recognize from the state of California. Ms. Salinas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually from the state of Oregon, but people...
Apologize, Oregon.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you to Chair Herodopoulos and Ranking Member Fushi for holding this hearing. I know we've gone over the budget a little bit, but I want to dive into the staffing that underlies this budget. President's budget request proposes eliminating tracks entirely. Would it be fair to assume that you would lose half of OSC's current staff if tracks is terminated?
So thank you for the question. As far as the FY27 budget request, we do continue the work of tracks. Again, as I tried to articulate earlier, it's not a question of if we should do it, but how should we do it? Is that through a contractor-owned model or a data-as-a-service solution or a government system only? So we are having those conversations, but we are not stopping the work on tracks. Through the FY26 appropriation process, Congress continued to fund the office at the sustained level, I think a couple $1 million cut. But that work is continuing. As the ranking member mentioned in her opening statement, we are continuing in the pilot phase. We are working on integrating operators into our platform to see how we can create the whole system of where the satellites are. As far as moving forward, we look forward to having those options on the table for how the government will do this work. Again, I like to say that it's not a question of if, but how we propose this in the future, because SSA data is in SPD3 from President Trump in 2020.
Okay. So going back to kind of the staffing levels, what does that mean for the number of people you will have on staff?
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer for you today, sitting here today, but I'd be happy to take that back and to work with you on that.
Okay, thank you. And if you could discern between what could be contracted and what could be in-house, that would be helpful as well. So I too worry that the proposal to allow OSC certification to satisfy other agencies' requirements could serve as a loophole for certain companies to skip that rigorous analysis by experts at the FAA, FCC, and NOAA. And it sounds like some of that work is still being negotiated as well. If this proposal moves forward, how do you ensure from the OSC side that you have the administrative capacity, the actual staffing, the technical expertise necessary to conduct your side of that rigorous analysis that would meet the statutory obligations of these partner agencies?
Thank you for that. And our expertise in-house relies on the years of work that we have done through our commercial remote sensing licensing efforts through CRISRA. So we have that expertise. We have done this before. We do it constantly. And really, the beauty about our certification process is that we will rely on the experts through the interagency. The breadth and scope of novel missions and technologies is going to be a lot, right? We're talking about space mirrors. We're talking about lunar landers, asteroid mining, orbital data centers. Like, you name it, no one agency has all that expertise. So I think it really does rely on the expertise of the interagency. When we will actually bring in new partners. I think one of the things I mentioned in my opening statement was there are companies out there looking at pharmaceuticals in space. So we're going to have to get the FDA involved in how we would certify something done in space. So it's new and interesting and exciting. But again, we're interested in a light touch administratively, leveraging the existing people within the federal government. And if we need to bring people more in-house within OSC, we would be happy to look at detail opportunities. But we also have the expertise through CRISRA in our years of remote sensing licensing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Your proposal does not make any mention of informing or consulting with the public as part of that certification review process. In-space activities could have the potential to provide positive benefits or harmful impacts for the public. It appears proposed certification approach would not include any means of public input or review of in-space activities with implications for the public. What is the plan to incorporate a means for public review and/or comment and considerations in the future?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And public comment is important, and we look forward to working on mechanisms we can put into our proposal to allow for that to happen. Obviously, interagency expertise is extremely important. Scientific expertise is important, and obviously, public input and comment is important. So we will work to be able to have that opportunity for folks to comment.
And when can we see that proposal?
Happy to work with the staff internally and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. My time's expired, and I will yield back.
I want to thank the representative from the great state of Oregon for her thoughtful questions. Outstanding work.
Thank you.
Thanks were made. I want to now recognize Congressman Self from Texas. You are recognized, sir, for 5 minutes.
You got it right, Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Jordan, I'm trying to reconcile some, it looks to me like internal inconsistencies in your written and your verbal testimony. You talked about we need to get our house in order, the government house in order. You talked about the commercial innovation is moving at the pace of innovation. You talked about the current regime being bad for innovation. So I'm trying to figure out, are we trying to catch up? So the current regime, as it stands today, are we trying to catch up with commercial innovation, or are we holding commercial innovation back? Because it looks to me like in your written and verbal testimonies, you tried to make both cases.
Thank you for the question, and I will be more clear. So we are trying to catch up, but the truth of the matter is we will never catch up to what industry is doing and how fast they are going. Creating a system today that is modular is the best way to move forward, because industry is going to do what industry does, and that's move fast and provide capabilities that the U.S. federal government relies on. We need to give them the confidence and the clarity to keep doing what they do. Now, we also need to catch up, if you'll allow me, on the international front. We have today cobbled together our ability to respond to the Outer Space Treaty through existing regulations. And sure, we meet the bare minimum requirements for our treaty obligations, but we need to meet the moment and meet industry where they are. So to be clear, we need to catch up because we are not meeting industry where they are at today.
Okay, so follow up, you kind of addressed this with Mr. Webster, but we live in a litigious society. So this new certification, can you tell me exactly the legal protections or the legal aspect of what this new certification does? Is it going to require consensus, one thing, amongst the different agencies? If it does, anytime you start reaching consensus across multiple government agencies, you make the bar higher. So what exactly do you consider the legal, both protections and authorities that you're giving the company?
So thank you for the question. We are relying on some existing statutory obligations that we have under Title 51 to seek the removal of policy and legal and institutional impediments to growth for the commercial space sector. When it comes to liability, as I had mentioned before, this is a question that we will have to address moving forward, because again, we're going to increase the amount of things in space, launched, applications, missions. So it's something that we have to work on. I don't have a great answer for you today. I know that other departments have some ability to either have statutory obligations for liability through launch and reentry for public safety, but that's something that we're going to have to address.
Okay, and I think my last question is going to be, how are we going to make sure that China is not hiding behind shell companies? Because that's their modus operandi today. Shell companies, multiple companies deep. How is this new certification going to make sure that we are not certifying basically a Chinese operation?
So thank you for the question. In our certification application, we envision asking the right questions to address exactly that issue. So in addition to what type of mission or what type of technology or what type of orbit, we're going to ask some basic government business structure questions, and not just where are you located, but who are the folks in your company and things like that, just to get to the heart of that issue.
I think those questions that you just outlined will be not sufficient because we know that China uses 3 or 4 shell companies deep. This is a major issue, and particularly I would think when it comes to space, because we know that they hide the actual ownership and control deep within multiple layers of shell companies. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to return to Dr. Babin, if we could, for a question. As you know, we didn't get all those questions in the record. Dr. Babin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You may not remember, Mr. Jordan, what that question was, but it was a proposal. And how would the Department of Commerce's proposal address the regulatory gaps that other agencies have attempted to fill? And would it reduce the need for other agencies to test the limits of their statutory authority?
So thank you for that question and reminding me of it. So for filling regulatory gaps, that is a question that we would probably want to work with Congress on,
Right.
Because those would require new statutory authorities that we do not currently have. Understanding that as it exists today, different space regulators attempt to fill those gaps, but the clarity on that would be extremely helpful.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we need to clarify that thing through codification. The Commercial Space Act of 2023 focused on establishing a clear process for the United States to carry out its obligations to authorize and supervise non-governmental actors under the Outer Space Treaty. The review process in that legislation was closely tailored to the United States' international obligations as they pertain to non-governmental actors. How did the Office of Space Commerce approach the review process proposed under the Space Commerce certification?
So thank you for the question. And as I said in my testimony and in questions, we do meet the Outer Space Treaty today, but we do it with the bare minimum. And I think that will change in the future when we have new and novel things in space that we can't even imagine. So how can we, as a government, authorize and supervise things to meet our treaty obligations that we don't have a regulatory system to even review? That's what we're offering, is our ability to meet the moment with industry to be able to authorize and supervise anything that comes our way, and we would still meet our international treaty obligations.
That's the kind of information exactly we need to find out today. Thank you. Follow up one thing. How much of the proposed review process is derived from the United States' international obligations compared to other federal governmental interests?
That's a great question, and I'd actually love to work with my staff and get back to you. But we do review our international obligations through the Outer Space Treaty, and I'll get back to them on any other things.
Okay, still a couple of minutes here. The Office of Space Commerce developed this mission authorization proposal in response to President Trump's Executive Order 14335, using, among other statutory authorities, its direction under Title 51 to foster the conditions for the economic growth and technological advancement of the United States space commerce industry. Last Congress, I introduced the Commercial Space Act of 2023 to formally grant your office authority over space object authorizations. Can you describe how additional legislative authority could help the Office of Space Commerce better carry out those objectives of mission authorization?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So as we have set up our certification today, it has to be voluntary because we are leveraging existing authorities that you mentioned, and also part of that as well is our authority to seek the removal of legal policy and institutional impediments to the growth of the commercial space sector. So we feel like that additional action from Congress would only assist in making our voluntary program more robust.
Yeah, excellent. While the Space Commerce Certification Framework applies to all space activities not covered by existing statutory authority, it places particular emphasis on providing a clear path for operators who seek to conduct novel or non-traditional space activities. The Office of Space Commerce provides several examples of such activities, including in-space manufacturing, orbital computing, satellite servicing, lunar operations, and commercial inhabitable stations. How do you anticipate applying the same certification process to such a wide range of activities?
So that is a great question that we have thought through within the office, and it does rely on the expertise through the interagency of the federal government. So different agencies are going to have different expertise, whether that's DOE or Department of War for space nuclear, or FDA for pharmaceuticals in space. We will rely on the expertise from the interagency, and those we will have core basic questions that we ask everybody, but we need to tailor the requirements for those missions, and we want to do that iteratively with the interagency and with industry.
Absolutely. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, we're going to move to the Congressman from California, Mr. Fong. Mr. Fong, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. This is a very important effort that's underway. My first question, the administration's proposal suggests that existing regulators, the FAA, FCC, and OSC, would utilize the space commerce certification to waive certain elements of their regulatory review. What are some of the examples of administrative burdens that may be reduced?
Sure. So through the certification process for novel space activities, it would allow industry to have that confidence because we integrate the presumption of approval, we integrate a light touch, we integrate industry standards, and we integrate some strict timelines to get to yes on that. And that is always step one in this process for why we're moving forward with this. It's to fill the gaps in the regulations. And the second part of it, which is quite interesting, is the deregulatory nature that we're putting into this, where we could ask questions on behalf of the interagency to satisfy potentially some of their questions that they would ask. So instead of asking it twice, you could ask it once through us, and that would be the deregulatory or the streamlining nature that we hope would be able to fit into the certification.
And this framework for the industry to voluntarily seek mission approval from the Department of Commerce, does this proposal require congressional action to implement?
So thank you. So yes, we are relying on, the system itself is voluntary and it's an opt-in because we're leveraging existing authorities, but additional authorities from Congress would make our system more robust.
What type of new authorities or additional authorities would you need?
Probably something along the lines of enforcement mechanisms to either allow companies to utilize this system, and if there's a bad behavior or a nefarious actor in the future, there's an enforcement mechanism that can draw that out in the process.
Okay. Many commercial space activities are done under contract with the government. For example, NASA's commercial LEO destinations program and the Commercial Lunar Payload Services programs are both commercial activities for which NASA is a customer. How are discussions going with your fellow space agency leaders on what activities should go through the Office of Space Commerce and that process versus what activities would be purely overseen by government purchasers, and how do we ensure that that bureaucratic back and forth doesn't hold back our priorities like returning to the moon?
Thank you for the question. So our ability to reach consensus with the interagency and submit this proposal to the White House in response to the executive order is a testament to the interagency actually reaching that consensus. So we're excited that we've worked with all of our partners, Department of War, State, NASA, to ensure that their equities are heard and met through our certification process. And that's human space flight, that's public safety, that's national security, that's international obligations. We have had many of those conversations over the last few months, and we feel like we're in a good place.
What are, I guess, from a short-term, near-term, what are the next steps? I mean, what's next on the checklist that needs to be done?
Thank you for that. So next on this is assuming that we get kind of the green light to implement our certification. We would love to put a call out for applications. We would love to then receive applications, ask questions of the companies through a tailored approach, review the application and put it into the interagency for review, at which point we could ask those questions along with the interagency, and then finally seek an approval.
Okay. My last question, an important element of the OSC's work is to provide public information about space traffic, about possible collisions in space. Certainly, a lot more attention is going on in space on the commercial side as well as on the national security side. In order to preserve the space environment for years to come, can you provide us an update on the OSC's space traffic program? And are there additional resources or authorities you need to move forward in this arena?
So thank you for the question. The work on our track system, our SSA issue is ongoing. In FY26 through congressional appropriations, we received funds and we are continuing that. It is in a pilot phase. We are in a production environment where we are onboarding satellite operators, and that work continues and is going well.
Okay. Well, look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Next, I want to recognize Ms. Fucci, again, our ranking member. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see that your proposal includes an interagency review. That proposal, however, states that, and I quote, "The interagency review shall include a voluntary opportunity for input from all departments and agencies with interest in the novel space activity under review," end quote. If such a review is merely voluntary, how would we have confidence that an application has been appropriately vetted for any national security, foreign policy, international obligations, safety, or other U.S. interests? Similarly, to what extent would the Secretary be obliged to adopt any agency input?
So thank you for the question, Ranking Member Fucci. So you raised the point that the interagency review is also voluntary, but we view that as having the experts in the room to answer those questions around national security, international obligations that you mentioned, and we have set strict timelines within our application review process that are going to hold our interagency partners to a high standard to put in the work to meet the timelines of the application. But you do raise a good point, and some of these things, again, it's a voluntary program, and new authorities to force that interagency collaboration would have to come through new authorities.
Okay. The brightness of large satellite constellations increasingly interferes with space-based astronomical observations and environmental monitoring for Earth-observing satellites. Just last week, the FCC approved a license for a space-based mirror designed to reflect sunlight back to the Earth, as we heard from the ranking member earlier, raising additional concerns for not only astronomy, but also to wildlife. These types of novel space activities highlight the need for a mission authorization framework, and one that considers potential impacts to our science. Will your proposed process review the scientific impacts of certification applications, and how will it protect federal investments in Earth and space science while mitigating potential harm?
So thank you for the question. Our certification will include the scientific observations and discourse in the applications, and part of that is going to be through our reliance on the experts, and I know I've said it a few times, but the interagency. So for astronomy, specifically for the example you mentioned, working with the NASA experts to understand how different applications or novel missions will impact downstream some other things like light pollution and astronomy. So we, again, would rely on experts such as those for NASA, and as I mentioned as well, we want to be able to have a mechanism for public comment as well.
Your proposal seems to state that NASA could only impose conditions or deny certification in the case of unacceptable dangers to the safety of space operations. Does that mean that the OSC proposal would not consider the science impacts of certification applications?
No, ma'am. Our intent would be to have scientific impacts as part of that review process. Yes, ma'am.
I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Next, Mr. Gallagher from California is here, recognized for 5 minutes for questions, sir.
I'm just here for a little bit.
Okay, no problem. Well, with no other, I'm going to take my 5 minutes. I want to get into the question about rulemaking, if we could. The Office of Space Commerce notes that implementation of this framework may not require typical rulemaking processes. What is your intended plan to move forward with this idea?
So our intended plan and next steps, assuming we have a green light from the White House on implementation of this, would be to, again, put out a call for applications, and then ask questions and tailor our application to first some basic questions around things like international obligations, national security, as well as basic business structure and how those things look. We will review those applications, and I should say as well as we have no opinion about which application should come first. Different technologies, the novel nature of what we're talking about here means we would probably get applications from a whole host of different technologies at one time. So we intend to look at mature technologies and mature missions and really focus in on what is near to operations in space. From there, we will put our application into the interagency. We will work with them on how we get to yes through that process. And then at the end of that, we anticipate being able to certify and authorize these missions. And again, we have built into our certification some strict timelines, and this is what industry has needed. They need that clarity and that confidence that this will not be an endless maze that kind of exists today. So we have built in, I believe, 120 days into the certification. We have some ability for extensions, but we need to cut it off at some point, and we need to give the industry the ability to get to yes, to attract capital, and to continue to do the things that they do best.
Okay. And with that idea in mind, the FAA has some of these opportunities to make this flexibility with rulemaking. And I would hope, are you using them as a guideline to do this, or are you looking a little bit different?
So we're looking at everything on the table at the moment because this is voluntary and we do not have an official next step. Again, this was a proposal from the executive order. We are kind of sitting and waiting, but we are looking at all options on the table as well.
Okay. And one last question. I see Mr. Whiteside is here as well. We actually proposed the One Giant Leap Act. The goal we've all had, as you know, is to go kind of one-stop shopping and making sure we stayed #1 in commercial space activities. With that in mind, how do you envision that one stop in time? Because that's our whole goal, is that, as you know, the Chinese are nipping at our heels in a lot of fronts. We want to reduce that bureaucracy. That's what the whole meeting today is about. How do we move towards one-stop shopping because of the different agencies that are involved today?
So that's a great question, and I do want to be clear. In this process for the Office of Space Commerce, we are not looking to take away any statutory obligations or regulations from other space regulators like the FAA or the FCC. The one-stop shop is a great idea, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to ask questions on their behalf, but we need a process that works. And we're really excited to test out our framework and our process with some great use cases to work out any kinks in the system and then deliver that back and showcase how that one-stop shop can work. But again, I just want to be very clear. We're not going to be taking away any statutory obligations from others.
No doubt. And that our goal is that one stop, but to begin with the safety ideas in mind. I'll yield now to the Congressman from California, Mr. Whiteside. Mr. Whiteside,
Thank you.
You're recognized for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your leadership and appreciate you, Director Jordan, for coming today. I wanted to start out with one of the Office of Space Commerce's existing responsibilities, which is licensing private remote sensing systems. These systems support everything from agriculture to disaster response to infrastructure monitoring and national security. Congress supported the 2020 reforms because they were intended to make the licensing process clearer and less burdensome while still protecting important national security interests. I understand your office is now considering further updates to make those rules work better in practice. Can you update the committee on your efforts to modernize and streamline remote sensing licensing and explain how those changes could better support American innovation and competitiveness?
Thank you for the question. So yes, since the 2020 update of the CRISRA regulations, we want to ensure that there have been no unintended consequences. Since that time, 6 years have passed, and we want to ensure that industry is still able to do the things it does best. Part of that is reevaluating the tiering structure. Are there unintended consequences? Do we accidentally pit international competitors and then put them at an advantage to American companies? Those are things that we want to take a look at, and we have not officially moved forward with opening that back up, but it is on our minds. We obviously have a lot on our plates through tracks and mission authorization and the advocacy work that we do, but it is something that we feel strongly to take a look at and how we can ensure that American businesses are able to do the things that they do best.
That's great. Certainly something that we support, and I think the point that you alluded to there in the middle is absolutely something that I think is happening where we're hurting domestic companies at the expense of Chinese competitors in particular. Second question that I want to ask is around the basic task of managing the rapid growth of the number of satellites in orbit. As more satellites are launched, operators face more close approaches and a greater risk of collisions. Commerce is obviously working hard on a civilian system to track satellites and debris and warn operators when objects may come too close. You've given a few updates on where that stands today. Can you just speak in a little bit more detail? What can the system do now? What still needs to be built? And when would Commerce be ready to fully take over that space safety role? You also mentioned the word containerization, which I was not familiar with, but I looked it up. Maybe you can talk about what that means and what's motivating that containerization.
So thank you for the question. So first, there's a few of them in there. Let me bite off a couple of them at a time. So for what this system is doing today and what could it do tomorrow type of question, We are focused on the collision avoidance mission, and I think that's paramount, and that is safety. That is, the air traffic control of space. Let's not have our satellites run into each other, create debris, which will impact others. So the basic function of the system we're creating is collision avoidance. Are there other capabilities that could be built on top of that? Sure, there could be, and that's a question that I would love to have with industry as well as the interagency and others. Should the federal government provide additional services on top of the basic safety services, or should that be left to the private sector as well to provide those capabilities on top of the existing platform that we're creating? When it comes to containerization, that just, for us, that's our ability to take the progress we've made and make sure that it is stable and that is in a good place as we consider the ability to work on different constructs for financing for our track system, whether that's through user fees or some type of partnership with industry, and how that looks going forward. And again, the answer that I gave earlier in testimony was, it's not a question of like if we should do this, it's how should the government go about doing this? Is that through an instilled government program, or is it relying more on commercial partners to assist us in that basic safety mission of collision avoidance? So those are questions that we're obviously asking ourselves and working on internally, and would love to have those conversations.
Thank you. I think my closing comment would basically be this work is super important, and we appreciate you taking a big crack at it. In many ways, it's kind of the Wild West in orbit right now, and people are surprised at how true that really is. And that's why I think however we solve these problems, that's why we got to get on top of it, especially in a world where we're heading towards potentially as many as 50,000 active satellites in orbit, which is a mind-boggling number for someone who's been in the space industry as long as I have. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you. And next, we recognize the Congressman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate you being here, Mr. Jordan. One of the things I was really concerned with is China's obviously aggressively pursuing a commercial space program. They don't have the regulatory burden we have. Obviously, they have a streamlined system because one guy gets to call all the shots. We obviously have a procedure that kind of can hamper us, but also make it safer and more fair. What do you think this administration is doing to make sure that we're still attractive in the commercial sector and developing and being competitive on a world scale? Obviously, we have people, some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, putting more spaceships in outer space than all the other countries combined, but we can lose that edge very quickly if we're overly regulated and burdened. What are we doing to make it attractive for people to still invest in the space programs here in the United States?
That's a great question, and it's a big question. So we are doing a lot to ensure that we can unleash our American space capabilities. I do think there is an opportunity before us today where other countries in the world and especially in NATO are increasing their defense budgets, and part of that is going to be a space capability portion of that. So there is more money going into space than ever before. Every week we see a new IPO or a new raise, and we see hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars going into the space sector. This is an opportunity for American companies to compete internationally as well and provide those capabilities and systems internationally. But part of that is we're going to have to ensure that our export controls are aligned to make sure that those things can be sold at the appropriate time in the appropriate place. But back home, I think what we're talking about today for our mission authorization framework is to give the private sector the clarity and the confidence that they can do to keep innovating as fast as they do. One thing I love to say is that all of our capabilities here, even for the government, are built on industry capabilities. So we have to support the industry that provides the capabilities that we as a government rely on.
One of the things that worried me last administration, I was very vocal about this in these same hearings, was that for each space launch, if they made a minor modification, there was a reapproval process that was really burdensome. And that could actually slow down the launch processes, get us way behind, once again, regulatory burden, that could put us at a competitive disadvantage. What have we done to correct that course?
So you're spot on. As capabilities improve and the cadence increases, we will have more launches, and we will need more launch facilities, and we will need more capability to meet that demand. So working with our partners in the Department of Transportation and the Department of War and NASA to ensure that we have the facilities we need to put things up when we need them, so we have the capabilities on orbit.
Yeah, the one thing I meant is the approval process. So every time you made a modification, let's say you said, oh, we can do this better, then your modification, it requires additional paperwork and an approval process. The paperwork's not the problem. Yep. but the approval process, streamlining a rapid response from the government, which is contradictory in my mind, making sure we get that we have a timeline that's very quick to reapprove the process of launch.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great point. So the paperwork that's required, of course, paperwork is fine, but the modifications themselves require more time and more effort. Can we internally look at using new systems electronically to even speed that up? That's something that we want to look at eventually in-house, is how do we speed up those processes? Because the modifications are going to happen. Capabilities on orbit do have new capabilities. They do have new things that they need to do. They need to be able to modify their request to a regulatory agency. But how we do that in a fast nature is, I think, what's most important.
I hope we continue to review that process and make it more speedy. I want to take just my remaining time to kind of pick on a NATO ally for a second. The most lucrative nation in the world per capita is Luxembourg. Now, we've criticized other countries for not getting the 2% and now 5% of GDP investment in their military. Luxembourg's like, well, you guys got more janitors than we have people in the military. And that's just in the military. But one of the things I always said, they make more per capita for GDP per capita than any other country in the world. And yet they invest the least of any NATO country in the military because we're too small. They were at 0.6% GDP. Now they're up to 0.9%. We really got to get them past 2 and actually eventually 0.5. The thing I always say is invest in space. Yeah, you're not going to have tanks and airplanes. I understand you're not going to overtake anybody with your artillery, but you are very good at space. Invest in that right there, and you can get up to 2% GDP, and you're going to make a difference in the way we look at even the military application of space exploration and technologies and communication amongst NATO countries. Would you agree?
Yes, sir, I would agree.
Fantastic. With that, I yield.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Foster from the state of Illinois. Recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to talk a little bit. One of the key elements in getting a successful commercialization going is getting a successful insurance industry. And it's my understanding that launch insurance is pretty well established and fairly successful. Is that a fair impression?
Yes, sir, that's my understanding.
Yeah, and it's very valuable, and it's been crucial for a lot of the economics of a lot of. Now, I'm more worried about actually terrorist insurance here. And, you know, there were recently, I think, the Reuters published some leaked papers about Chinese-Russian collaboration on simple schemes to wipe out Starlink. All right, and you can imagine if things continue to go downhill for the Russians, it will be very attractive for them to decide to do something in a way that might be very hard even to attribute to them. But it's not just China and Russia that we have to worry about. It is terrorists. You know, like a lot of people these days, I'm having Claude Code do interesting projects. One of the things I did not long ago was ask it to calculate the debris field if someone accidentally detonated a Starship when it was fully fueled in low Earth orbit, and the debris field from there and how destructive that would be. Okay, and that's something where you're talking about, you know, one rogue nation with one old Russian fighter jet launching an air-to-air missile and taking out a fully fueled Starship. And so there are many other scenarios. Just roughly speaking, anyone who puts a bucket of gravel in a counter-rotating orbit is going to wipe things out. And so the cost, the damage that can be done with a very cheap mission is enormous. And so how is that an insurable risk? And what is the way forward on eliminating that risk?
So that's a good question that I think we all are asking ourselves, because as you stated that, you know, Department of Transportation, through their launch and reentry, they have established some liability and some insurance needs for that. I'd be happy to work with you and industry on that, because I think one of the issues that we want to make sure that we are cognizant of is the burden on industry for that, because there is not a level playing field. You have big companies and you have small companies, and the requirement of insurance could negatively impact, you know, startups over the larger companies.
Oh yeah, no, it's very analogous to requiring cybersecurity insurance of a small startup that's handling a very valuable data set that can do, you know, tens of billions of dollars of damage if that data set's leaked. You know, it's very hard. You know, one simple mistake, you could be doing everything right and misconfigure one database, and kaboom, you've done, you know, billions of dollars of damages. No startup has the capital to do that, and I don't see any easy way that's an insurable risk. So what are the best thinking? What's the plan, and when are we going to see a detailed plan out of industry of how to get this insured?
So I think you raise a good point, and I think we internally at OSC, as the industry advocate inside the U.S. government, we need to have those conversations with industry. Maybe that's a series of listening sessions or just planning on what does that look like for them. Because again, I do want to be cognizant of the burdens we place on industry, and what we're here to talk about today with our mission authorization framework is ensuring that industry has the confidence they need to do the things they do best, and that's to innovate quickly.
That's right, but everyone wants the government to provide free insurance. You know, you see it in flood insurance, you see it everywhere you look. You see it in Florida, in spades. And so this is it's a problem, and you have to, ultimately, if you're looking at the commercial viability of space, they have to pay for the costs that they impose on the taxpayer if the taxpayer is going to be required to backstop insurance. So, is there a general appreciation inside industry of just how fragile these systems in low Earth orbit are against terrorist-type attacks?
I think there are, depending on the different sector within the space sector, whether that's a more national security-focused space company. But I believe they take this seriously, and we need to understand where those limitations lie and what needs to be done, if anything, at the federal level.
Yeah, and it's a huge problem because you're talking about small rogue nations that can do this, and a small rogue nation that's about to lose a military conflict has a tremendous. Their lives would be much easier if they could just knock out Starlink or the GPS system or orbital data centers, for that matter. Anyway, when you figure this out, let me know, because this is something I've been worried about for quite a while.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. With no other members for questions, I'd like to thank our witness today, Mr. Jordan, for your time and thought today. I know there's some questions you're going to follow up on as well. Thank you very much. And the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.